2BS 95.1 FM.
The National Party have released a 9-point plan that aims to see regional Australia lead the country's post-COVID economic recovery and rejuvenate Australian manufacturing. To explain this, we welcome New South Wales National Senator Perrin Davies. Senator, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Pleased to be talking to Bathurst and region.
Yeah, well, thanks for your time this afternoon. Are you able to unpack for us why this plan highlights regional areas as fit to lead in the COVID recovery?
Absolutely. I'm, as well as being a senator for the Nationals, I'm also on the Select Committee looking into our response to the COVID pandemic. And the one thing that has been glaringly obvious the whole way through since the pandemic started to bite and since the government started rolling out their responses is how healthy our regions are. Our regional economies stood through the pandemic, and despite the fact that small business has been hit hard, particularly in border regions where, you know, they have been open and closed and subject to lockdowns, our predominant regional industries such as mining, resources, and agriculture have stood firm and in some instances have actually increased their economic output. So the regions are absolutely primed to continue that economic strength, but also we need to look at where we've got opportunity and where we can learn from what we've experienced during the pandemic and actually look at increasing and expanding business in the regions so that we can build on that strength.
COVID has put Australian supply chains in the spotlight. Why do you think it's important to increase onshore manufacturing here in Australia?
Well, we learned very early in the pandemic there was a lot of concern raised about our access to what on the surface would seem to be simple things like surgical masks. But although we had onshore manufacturing, it was small scale, and we were importing most of the masks that we need in our country on a day-to-day basis. And what we learnt in a pandemic, that was not sufficient because every country in the world was looking for surgical masks at the same time, and you know, forces of supply and demand came into play, and protectionism came into play, where countries quite rightly were looking at what their needs were and fulfilling those needs before they were filling export contracts. So we had to turn it around very quickly. The government stepped in to support some onshore manufacturers. We stepped it up, we turned it round, and we have met our onshore needs. But what we need to make sure of, and what the Nationals believe, is that we cannot find ourselves in that situation again. We need to look at not only those sort of health gaps, but what other gaps have we got? And also, what raw materials do we produce here in Australia that at the moment we're exporting to get processed or manufactured into an end product? And why are we doing that? Does that make economic sense, where we could actually build industries here in Australia based on our fantastic raw materials?
So what sort of manufacturing opportunities or gaps have the Nationals identified? Where are they actually based?
Well, the government itself has identified 5 core manufacturing priorities, including resources, technology, critical minerals, food and beverage, medical products, recycling and clean energy, defence and space. The Nationals believe that we need to include fibre production into that, into those 5. So, you know, we have suggested food and beverage and fibre. And we're looking at where those industries already exist in Australia, but also where our logistics chains are, and where we have good logistics that would support the expansion of those industries, or moving some of those industries out from, you know, the suburbs of Sydney or Melbourne into a regional area, as long as they're supported by other infrastructure that will help our regions grow and also produce the jobs in the regions where we've got a lot of people who would be happy to do a hard day's work if the opportunity was there.
Well, I note here there is a point to create a decentralisation office of regional manufacturing to achieve growth targets in priority areas. Are those areas of priority what you just mentioned there, food, beverage and fibre, or is that different?
No, those are the priority areas. But we would also be looking for, gaps in existing industry and looking at where new technology can come. I mean, one of the areas is critical minerals and processing of critical minerals. Australia has really good reserves of critical minerals, things like lithium and mineral sands that can be mined, and currently we ship offshore and they get put into things like solar panels, electric cars, and batteries for renewables. Would it not be fantastic if in Australia, instead of digging it up and sending it overseas, we dug it up and used our own lithium to produce our own batteries to support our solar and wind farms?
Mm. Well, we see a lot of foreign investment in that sector at the moment.
And it's true, and currently a lot of the components for our renewables are coming to us from offshore. I'm not proposing that we would be able to overnight suddenly turn things around completely, but we need to absolutely look at where the future is, where there are gaps in our existing supply chains onshore, and we need to build on that. That will also mean that we need to look at how we train people for the manufacturing sector. And one of our points in our 9-point plan is looking at consolidating the training across the states, because we've got a bit of a piecemeal approach at the moment. We've got TAFEs, which provide great training, but it's different state by state. And then we've got our universities, and we need to look at the training of trade qualifications to harmonise the qualifications and employment conditions across the nation to make it easier for both up-and-coming tradies and for employers alike.
Point number 8 of the 9-point plan says the Nationals would like to, and I quote, invest in reliable and affordable energy and in a strategic infrastructure that can support manufacturing, including coal and gas-fired power. When we're talking about welcoming renewable clean energy, it seems that coal and gas-fired power is the opposite of where Australia should be heading to meet climate goals. Why is this important to the Nationals?
Well, it's important for the short term, because even the Australian Energy Market Operator has identified that Australia will need, for the next 15 to 20 years, at least 6 to 19 gigawatts of reliable baseload power a year to support our transition to renewable energy. And the fact is, a lot of our existing coal-fired power plants are approaching the end of life. There is new technology for high-energy, low-emissions coal-fired power plants. Australia produces the cleanest burning coal in the world. So as part of the worldwide move to lower emissions, Australia's coal has an important role to play. But also we need to look at, by reducing the travel miles of manufactured products, you're also reducing emissions. So if we need to have good, reliable baseload power to do that, it makes sense to look at a low emissions power supply here in Australia, so that we can, reduce the transport miles of products, but also ensure that we're using the most efficient technology while we're still transitioning, because it's been identified at the moment, even the biggest batteries in the world can't produce the sort of baseload power that is required by our manufacturing sector, such as our aluminium smelters that we have in Australia. And people talk about green steel. Well, at the moment, there is no renewable solution for green steel yet, but we are talking about, the next 15 to 20 years, that technology will be there, but we need to get there first.
Senator, thank you so much for your time this afternoon on the program. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It was great talking to you.
You too. See you. The Nationals' New South Wales Senator there, Perrin Davey, having a chat about the Nationals' 9-point plan to see regional Australia lead the country's post-COVID economic recovery and rejuvenate Australian manufacturing. You're listening to Live and Local.